It's my pleasure to introduce session 3 from the second day of the Old Vine Conference. The session title is The Hidden Strength of Old Vines, A Path to Climate Resilience. This session is going to be moderated by Michelle Bouffard. Michelle is an author, journalist, consultant, and educator. She's also a certified sommelier and a WSET certified educator. She is currently in stage 2 of the Masters of Wine program. I feel your pain. Keep going. In 2017, Michelle founded Tasting Climate Change, an international symposium that addresses solutions to adapt to and mitigate climate change within the wine industry. That same year, she published her first book, and in 2021, she co-authored Quel vin pour demain, published by Dunod, with a second edition in the fall of 2024. She contributes to the TV show Curia Vegan, writes a weekly column for Le Devoir, and is a regular columnist for Extra Brut and Quench magazine. She's also the owner of Vino Studio, a wine school that offers WSET courses. Michelle is joined by Etienne Neethling. He is the holder of a doctorate in viticulture and enology, and is today a lecturer and researcher at the Ecole Supérieure des Agricultures in Angers. He's the head of the Master of Science in Vine, Wine and Terroir Management and an OIV expert within the Sustain Group. It's also a great pleasure to welcome Faouzi Issa. Hello, Faouzi, my friend. Thank you for joining us. Faouzi is the managing director and winemaker of Domaine de Tourelles in the Bouffard Valley in Lebanon. He studied agricultural engineering at the American University of Beirut and worked for two very well-known estates in France, Domaine Rostaing in Côte-Rôtie and Chateau Margaux in Bordeaux. Faouzi has gone on to gain international recognition for his wines, and I think, having known you personally for many years, Faouzi, I'm so grateful you can join us, and thank you for all your work, despite the challenges I know you're facing at the moment. So I will hand over to Michelle, and thank you so much to our panel.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks for having us. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm really thrilled to host this webinar. We know that climate change is bringing a lot of chaos. We have some years of drought. We have some years of too much rain. This is something that a lot of regions are experiencing. And when we think of old vines, we associate quality to it, but we also associate often vines that have more diseases, a bit more fragile. So I'm really interested to talk to our fantastic panelists about, with their knowledge and experience, how they are seeing the vines adapt to climate change. Are they stronger than young vines? And is this something that we should hold on for the future, knowing that climate change would continue to be a threat? Faouzi, I would love to start with you. Thank you so much for making it. And I know you have some beautiful old vines of Cinzano in Carignan, and also indigenous grapes in your region. What is your experience in how resilient those vines are compared to your younger vines with climate change?
First, thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Sarah, for this opportunity to be a panelist in such a nice initiative. I'm a winemaker in Bekaa Valley, and Bekaa Valley in Lebanon is known to have to be home of some old vines. I would say we experience some vines that have more than 150 years untreated, unpruned, and living really on a freestyle on the mountains. So the experience between young, and since we have been expanding lately and planting a lot of young vines, so we can exactly know the difference between these two generations, I would say. For the old vines, it's important to highlight the strength, the resiliency, and the resistance of the old vines in Bekaa Valley that was um, developed through the years, I would say, due to the adaptation of the weather. Lebanon and Bekaa Valley is we have a dry summer, so we tend to have droughts. And old vines are known to have extensive root system that is really very developed and can afford to reach water nutrients on its own. So we can see that when we have some heat waves, we see the performance of old vines are definitely more adapted to the situation than young vines. And do I have time to describe more than
please go.
I mean
Yes,
about?
absolutely.
So
Because your vines,
if we talk
just
about the
Faouzi, I just want to make a precision. Your vines are non-irrigated, right? It's dry farming.
yeah, all the old vines
Yes.
are non-irrigated. The young vines we irrigate because they should be irrigated in the beginning to reach the adaptation later on. So, and with the global warming, we need to be cautious. So so first, the rooting system of the old vines is very developed, and it helps for water, for nutrients. The other factor in the old vines that give us a kind of resistance and solidity is the canopy. Most of the old vines, I have a beautiful old vines picture in my office. I can show it to you later. You can see the canopy of the old vines, which really, when you reach 40, 50, 60 years, the canopy becomes like a shelter. It's like a house where we all know that leaves, trees, they grow moving apically, which means with the sun, and they become really a canopy that can protect the grapes and create a kind of protection inside the bush vines, and where humidity will stay inside. One, you can keep on humidity, which means you can keep the vine protected against drought, and the exposure of the leaves with the vines, you can be protected against diseases and pests. So yeah, I mean, definitely, it's a no-brainer. It's a easy way to conclude when we have two plots. One is 60 years, the other one is 4 or 5 years. Definitely, the old one is has more strengths.
I know that you have Carignan and Cinzano, but you also have indigenous grapes planted that are old vines. Do you see a difference in the behavior of indigenous grapes planted versus Carignan and Cinzano?
Yes, we do. We see. You mean in the resistance, or we're talking about the quality of the vines?
Within when you have climate change, when you have years of drought, for example, if you compare the old vines of
Totally,
Carignan and Cinzano
totally.
yes, and how different?
The impact on climate change or heat wave or climate behavior on old vines is practically every year, but could be 10%. But the impact of the same conditions on young vines could reach 50 to 60%.
But if you compare indigenous grapes to Carignan and Cinzano, is the impact the same on all vines?
They are even stronger. They are
Stronger.
even more adapted. Yeah, because native vines they are in their how we say hometown advantage.
Yes,
So they are
yes.
here. They were native here in Lebanon, and so the vines that is called merweh, which is we do the skin wine out of this merweh, is unpruned untreated, at least for the past, since the 60s and the 70s. And you can see the vines climbing on the cedar trees on the mountain, beautiful grapes, healthy, beautiful leaves, and the yield is lower. So that's the other part that we have to mention, but which we expect, because the older will get more structure but less volume in the vines.
And in the you were mentioning also when I was talking to you before, that you attribute the quality of the old vine because they are non-treated. You haven't ever used chemicals on them. I imagine in your region there are other producers having old vines that have treated vines with chemicals. Are you seeing a difference in the resilience of the old vines?
This is a big question, because it's related more about the mentality of confidence of if we trust them or we don't trust the vines. Basically, in Bekaa Valley, 90% of the producers who have confidence, they do not treat conventionally or chemically the old vines, because they know that they have adaptation, and it's too easy, Michel. The vine has a behavior of the human being. If you start taking medicines from day one, you will be dependent on that. But if you depend on natural behavior and natural resistance with auto resistance in your body, you will reach a certain age where you can solve your problems. Without any intervention. So the vines is the same. It's completely the same. The more we pamper the vines and we give it whatever, if we have some yellow leaves, we give water. If you have some low yield, we give fertilizer. You will end up raising vines that are dependent on intervention. But you know what? Vines it's among the plants, like the olive trees, that they can live without the intervention of the human being and give you the best quality with time. And then we impacted socially the behavior of the vines. I would say the human being and the big industries of chemicals and fertilizers. And I think we should go back to old vines, with natural old vines. We need to add on the Old Vines Conference, natural old vine conference.
Thank you, Faouzi. I'll come back to you because I have questions for everyone at the end. But I'd like to move on to Comte Cinzano. Thank you so much for joining us from Italy. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
It's a nice segue, because I know that in Tuscany you've had it's been a roller coaster in terms of weather. You've had some years with drought condition. You've had some years with lots of rain. What is your observation? I'll start with your observation, because I also know that you have a department of research and development. But from your observation, if you compare the years of drought, the years of lots of rains, from between the young vines and the old vines, what are you noticing?
Well, at Col d'Orcia, we farm mostly Sangiovese. And so the experiences on this local grape variety. And of course, we have vineyards of all ages. But about 10 years ago, together with the organic certification, the organic management of the vineyard, and also more biodynamic approach, we have decided to reserve certain parts of the vineyard to letting the vineyard grow old. So replacing the losses that we have, we in general have an average of 2% losses of individuals in the vineyard each year, which increases on rainy years such as this one. So our old vineyard is a vineyard that sees also some young individuals in it. And on the older plants, of course, we see a greater resilience to the climatic conditions, especially in terms of drought and heat wave. We see a slower reaction, slower phenomenon of dehydration and sufferance by the plant, by the older plants. We see the younger plants being more subject to reacting more rapidly to to the extreme weather conditions, and we. Of course, one of our practices, which is in our view, positive, and I was interested in hearing about Lebanon and creating the parasol effect of the canopy of an older plant to protect the fruit from the direct sunlight and the during heat waves. On the other hand, we tend to renovate wood. We tend to try and help the plant to remain healthy and not subject to the fungi that cause the death of the plant by renovating the aerial part, renovating the wood from the foot of the plant onwards. So we will, wherever it's possible, when we do the winter pruning, if we have a sprout coming from the lower part of the plant that we see healthy and vigorous, then we will tie that one up and allow it to grow, and eventually the following year or in 2 years later, we will cut the old wood because the old wood is in many instances a door of entry for pathologies to the plant. So we tend to renovate a lot, and which obviously does not help in terms of the aesthetics of the vineyard, but it helps us reduce the impact of the fungi pathologies that may occur. And so all in all, a greater resilience, a more developed root system, which helps the plant defend itself from extreme phenomena that we have seen. This year we've had one of the rainiest years in memory, and so extreme events this year as well. And as I say now, in recent years, every year is we face uncharted territory in terms of weather conditions. We have to learn. We are learning every year new phenomena in the affecting the vineyard.
Can you talk a little bit about the other research you've been doing? I know you've been doing a lot of work in terms of soil management to ensure that the plant is, grows old, but is also more resilient.
Yes, well, we use a large amount of compost in the management. Together with green manure, the only source of fertilizer, and we conducted a research with a couple of universities, including University of Florence, and we have added to our compost, our traditional compost made up of manure and hay and prunings and biodynamic preparations. We have added also another element, which is a volcanic rock zeolite. So a volcanic rock that has a very specific hydroponic characteristics. It's the chemical structure of zeolite allows it to accumulate moisture during the cold months of the winter, and then release the same moisture during the hot months of summer. So it helps to improve the water retention capacity of the soil, and helps in drought years, especially in years in which we have lack of rainfall. So that's a very interesting research, which also we have seen affect the extractability of tannins and of flavonoidi and anthocyanins and anthocyanins and flavonoids. So I have to remember to send that to you, because I have the study in English, and it's very interesting, and it's a totally natural product. Zeolite is dug out of the ground as a as a volcanic rock. Some tests we have done also in using zeolite in powder form, sprayed on the fruit to protect it from the direct sun rays in heat wave situations. So it works in the same way as kaolino. I don't know if you with kaolino, which is also used for the same purpose. So quite interesting, as I say, zeolite. Other than that, it's really, in our view, the most important aspect is to create a healthy environment in which, as was said just earlier by the other panelist, creating the environmental conditions where biological control steps in, where for any sanitary problems that may arise, the balance of the plant with the environment, the harmony of the vineyard with the other cultures that we have on the on the farm interact and make sure there is a healthy environment for the plants.
Thank you so much. I'd like to move on with Etienne, who's done a fantastic presentation during the conference of Tasting Climate Change last January. If you want to watch it, you can go to tastingclimatechange.com and you'll see his whole conference. And Etienne, you have a lot to say about how old vines can be a source of genetic material to help adapt in the future to the chaos of climate. Can you share with us your knowledge? And I know you have a few slides for us.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you also to the Old Vine Conference for this invitation. Yeah, for me, the hidden truth in old vines comes actually from the Old Vine Conference series that started. A lot of the research that I'm currently doing has been inspired by the different talks that have been taking place in the last year or two. So I definitely don't have the knowledge to talk about genetics or epigenetics. My field is more looking at how do we increase climate resilience for the adaptation of the wine sector to climate change. And one of the areas that I really focused on was this concept of vulnerability and understanding how a system is then sensitive to vulnerability. And so I looked at specifically the question of a genetic erosion that started by the beginning of the 20th century with the phylloxera crisis. A lot of varieties that were replaced by more international varieties. This contributed to this concept of genetic erosion. And then once we got to the stage of the 1970s of clonal selection, we started to make preference for a certain number of clones. And this added to this concept of genetic erosion. And to some extent, I feel that a big part of our vulnerability today is because we have forgotten the principle of functional biodiversity. using a population of genotypes that can offset not just climate change, but I will also, if I have the time, to show how climate variability is such a key issue. It's not just a trend of how global warming is taking place, but the different extremes taking part on an annual basis, where we can see cold, wet years, and actually this concept of robustness, and how we then build a very resilient system regardless of the climate of tomorrow. And that got me to this question about clonal selection. I don't think Sarah mentioned this, but my accent probably will show that I'm originally from South Africa. So coming from South Africa and working today in France, I obviously were exposed to a very warm climate, and now living in the Loire, which is much more moderate and much cool. I've always been a little bit more optimistic when I look at climate change, because South Africa as a country should be too warm, too dry, but through good vineyard management practices, good decision making, both in the vineyard and the cellar, there's a lot of solutions that are available. But for me, the question of varietal innovation has always been the most cost-effective solution, because we can make very good decisions at planting and it will not cost us more money. And thinking about the vine as a perennial, obviously the decisions we take today in 2024 will have a lot of consequences by the end of the century. So I started to look at clonal diversity, because there was two very opposing factors. On the one side, we had public nursery data showing us that we had 3-4 clones for the major varieties that were covering about 90% of our vineyards. So the same genotype with the same bud burst date, the same flowering date, and therefore the same climate sensitivity. And at the same time, a country like France, with all its genetic resources, had so many genotypes that were preserved in what we call regional conservation plots. I imagine Italy will have the same. I know the Portuguese has the same genetic resources. So we have this massive genetic pool of what we call intravarietal diversity, which is at this moment not used and not understood by the industry. So we started to, and I was very fortunate to work with different partners, French, but also Portuguese and even South African partners, where we are looking at the genetic diversity within a variety. So just to give you an idea about the numbers, in the Loire Valley, we have a conservation plot who belongs to the IFV service, and they will have over 400 genotypes of Chenin Blanc. So that's a massive range of genetic diversity. If you look to South Africa, they will have their old vine heritage clones in addition to the 10 certified clones of Chenin. So there's a lot of genetic diversity available for each of these international varieties, or mostly cultivated varieties. And we wanted to understand how these clones vary in terms of phenological stages, yield, ripening. And we started to see very interesting results. Firstly, that some of the genetic diversity was as popular and as big as we can observe between very opposing varieties. So for instance, I will see that my Chenin early ripening clone will be very close to what we understand from a perspective of Chardonnay or Pinot Noir, and we can have then clones of Chenin that is as late as a Uni Blanc, a Mourvèdre, and all these late ripening varieties. So it gives us a lot of possibility. And coming back to the question of resilience and this notion of no regret strategies, I think there's a much more certainty of choosing late developing genotypes within the same variety than replacing your variety with, let's say, an alternative variety, because we don't know how the market will react to that new variety. And at the same time, it also introduced to the grower an additional challenge of understanding new techniques, because each variety, it's almost like a child. The way you educate them is very different, and they need to adapt also to your natural terroir setting. So that was the first thing, not to be too long, is to say that we have genetic diversity within the population of our clones. And they already highlight a very interesting resource for climate change adaptation. But coming back again to what I mentioned initially, is there's such a strong issue with climate variability. And the year 2024 in France shows us that we are not just always talking about global warming, drought, heat, but we have also very cold years that can still take place. And a year like 2024, late ripening genotypes will almost be impossible to bring towards maturity. I know about a lot of growers that had to shut Thalys this year to add sugar, and they will have difficulty with their styles. So it shows us that we should not just replace the early with the late, but it shows us also the importance of population. And that's where we started to work on the concepts of polyclonal selection. So I imagine a lot of people attending often make the difference between clonal and massal selection. But what I like about polyclonal selection is that it doesn't put into a negative image clonal selection. And I'm definitely a pioneer for clonal selection. It gives us, as we heard this morning from Louisa, it gives us the certainty that it's virus-free, and that's a big problem in the industry, and we want to have virus-free material. But secondly, it gives us a genetic guarantee about that individual. Clonal selection was studied in different environments, so we know exactly how that clone will then perform. And polyclonal definitely builds on that. And today we can we have access to several certified clones, and these certified clones are almost, and maybe I can share my slide, but it's something that Laura Catena presented it last year. And it's something that spoke to me immediately. I'm going to share it with you. And please, Michelle, tell me if you can see my slides.
It's just turning on right now.
Yeah, so I'm going to, it's basically what I've said, but I want to get to the place. Yeah, so last year, Laura Catena made this presentation. For me, clonal selection or polyclonal selection allows me to explain this in a few words. But we think about Cabernet Sauvignon. We think about, for me, obviously, rugby is a very important sport coming from South Africa and France. And we see Antoine Dupont as this, very, very good rugby player. And this will be like the clone 169 for Cabernet Sauvignon. We know exactly how it performs. And we see it as a very good cultivating clone. And polyclonal selection will just basically say that we had the opportunity within the Common Garden experiment to look at all the rugby players of France, so all the genotypes of Cabernet Sauvignon. And we have selected among them the 15 that is the most genetically promising. And that gives us, regardless of the environment, and that's the key word here, that if I plant it in Lebanon or in South Africa or in Italy or in France, it will give me the same genetic promise because the genetic component is stable regardless of the environment. And that's where polyclonal selection comes in, and it's a very interesting Portuguese principle. And that's where, obviously, for me, it's already interesting to work on. So these are the 15 rugby players of France, and they are considered the best. And what is also interesting in this approach about polyclonal selection is that it is also a very dynamic process. And that's where the Old Vine Conference is such an interesting tool, because it allows us to have an international community that starts talking together about old vines. Yes, there's the economic sustainability, the agronomy, the sustainability, but it also gives us the opportunity to work jointly together, because there's also rugby players elsewhere, and there's also genotypes elsewhere. And we think today about how plants have adapted to very diverse climates. And Cabernet Sauvignon's international variety it's a very good example, because Cabernet Sauvignon in South Africa, in Napa Valley, or in Australia is cultivated in much warmer and drier conditions than France. So genetically increasing the diversity or the plasticity of that variety in very extreme conditions, but which can most likely be the future conditions of France. So increasing the genetic pool of Cabernet Sauvignon genotypes for France. And that's why, I just quickly looked. If you look at the Old Vine Conference registry today, you have 155 mentioned vineyards coming from 12 countries. So already just that 154 genotypes, if we can plant them in the same vineyard, study how they are genetically diverse and how they will perform for different agronomy features, because obviously we have different production objectives. Sometimes yield is more important, or phenology, etc. So the Old Vine Conference has been a great inspiration in my case, but it shows such great potential in terms of how we can increase our resilience towards climate variability and climate change, because we need to work together. And the Old Vine Conference, like many other, let's say, movements, provide an international message where we can actually find solutions together. And I know this is one of the things also that you do through your Tasting Climate Change Conference. So I just wanted to mention that, and just maybe conclude that we already have some genotypes from South Africa planted in the Loire. So these things are happening. But I would say the takeaway message is, if we think about the hidden strengths or the hidden richness of old vines, is that they are continuously providing us new genotypes that we need to study and explore. They're increasing the genetic diversity that we already know within a variety. And if we look at climate change and climate's variability, we need to think about every variety as a population of clones and how we can use this population as a functional biodiversity principle to offset climate impacts.
Thank you. Merci, Etienne. We have a question from the public, but before I take the question, I'd like to ask all of you a question. When we look at different regions, we know that in some areas, when we first planted those old vines, we did not always choose the best clones. For sometimes it was for productivity, sometimes it was for it was to be the most productive, even though today they're not as productive because they're old. But also with times, you know, when we look at the clones that we need to plant now, for example, we're realizing that the clone we once chose are not adapted anymore with climate change, because the reality is different. So when we're faced with an old vine that was planted, it's still there, but perhaps was not planted with the best genetic material at the time, do we keep that old vine because it's resilient to climate change, or are we better off to replant with everything we've talked about and then start from there to grow a new old vine?
I'm not a grower, so I will definitely not have the same credentials as both the panelists. But I think the key today is understanding that initial clone, Michelle, is probably not the same material today. Changes happen over time,
Yes.
so somatic mutations. And I think that's have been the strength of old vines. Initially, they were already maybe planted as a mix of different genotypes, because before clonal selection, we didn't have the same agronomy knowledge. And we often used vegetative propagation from neighboring fields and then planting a mix, clonal block. Yeah, but I think today, if we think about planting vineyards, I think, and the best scenario that I can give is looking at any cellar. We never buy our barrels from the same tonnellerie. We always like to bring in different components that will add complexity to any blending process. And a vineyard should have the same reflection. We should buy different clones from different nurseries, increasing the functional biodiversity of our vineyard, which is a nature-based solution. It's something that, again, is very cost-effective, but at the same time makes also very sense from a material perspective. And that, I think, is the keys today of thinking how we plant vineyards today that will grow old eventually. But the question about uprooting is difficult. There's so many factors that are important. The market of that wine, the yield, which comes back to everything that is related to the sustainability of the vineyard. And listening to the presentation before about Humilia in Spain, you can see that there's this question about where's the limit of sustainability, the economic sustainability, in addition to the value of that vineyard.
Of course. Faouzi, I saw you nodding when I was asking the question. I saw you nodding when I was asking the question. Did you have something to add to that?
Well, I think the key word is complexity, as it has just been said. Of course, all vineyards today are from the days of the beginning of the clonal selection, from the late 80s, 1990s, and so on. And I would say that in replacing the plants that are dying, we can improve the genetic pool in which we have in any vineyards. And of course, we have conducted the clonal selection at Col d'Orcia with the University of Florence, and we have also planted some plots with monoclones, and we have soon gone back to polyclones or anyway pool of different individuals in the planting. What was, and I perfectly agree with what has been said, that this is an important element of biodiversity. The different individuals in that are used to that are planted, and the how can I say this? The it is important to bring into the conference the nursery people, because often the big limitation is the availability of genetic material in the nurseries. In Tuscany, or even though Sangiovese is the most planted grape variety of central Italy, you can barely find a dozen different clones. We have a whole series, a whole very large number of clones, maybe not as many as for Cabernet Sauvignon that was mentioned in South Africa, but certainly 50 or 60 clones. But we cannot find them in the nursery. We cannot get the nurseries to multiply them and offer them to vineyards. And so we need the contribution of the nursery people to be able to work with a biodiverse environment within the variety we choose to plant.
Absolutely, I agree. We have the same problem in Canada. It's very difficult to get good planting material. Faouzi, did you have anything to add?
No, I'm just saying that we are trying to follow the steps of Sélection Massal in Lebanon, where the vines that are proven to be old vines with healthy, capable to resist and adapt to the weather. We have a kind of agreement with a nursery locally in Bekaa Valley, where we give them some good stems or I would say rameaux to be able to do Sélection Massal and then plant young vines with the old identity and the genetics of the old resistant old vines.
We're going to have to wrap up. I'm looking at the time, but Faouzi, we had a question for you. Someone was asking, are your vines ungrafted?
Yes, but all the old vines are ungrafted, but just to because they ask if this can contribute to the resistance, just to make something clear that the grafting the vines was 99% based on the phylloxera risk. So to be able to use the grafting phenomenon in order to create the resistance, I think leaving the vines ungrafted with free risk of phylloxera would enhance more resistance as well.
Thank you so much. It's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you, everyone, for your contribution. And thanks again, Sarah, for this opportunity. And thanks for having us.
Thank you.
No, thank you all. And I must apologize. I realized that in the flurry of the introduction, Count Cinzano, I didn't give your biography, so I'd just like to make up for that and just finish off this session.
Organic Brunello producer. That's
organic wines from old vines, from a very long-standing family tradition of winemaking from the 17th century. And having visited Col d'Orcia, I can say that it's really a wonderful estate, and I know the attention that you put into the vineyards, and also the kind of the way you combine tradition and innovation as well. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for an excellent moderation, Michelle, and Etienne and Faouzi. Great work. And this issue that Etienne raised about we need to get the nurseries involved, and also that was seconded, of course, by Francesco. I think you've just given us an impetus for a new direction for collaboration. So, right, we're on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci, Sarah.
Merci.